Why struggle through a post-merger integration when you can glide through it? Why deal with the PMI integration challenges when you can overcome them even before they occur? Why move slow when you can move at pace? What are the world's leading PMI experts doing right now to achieve profit-accelerating integrations? This podcast will give you all the answers to these questions and many more. My name is Dudley Peacock, and welcome to the 100 Days and Beyond podcast.
Thank you for joining us today, and a bright, hot summer's day here in the UK. I tell you, wow, those temperatures are rising. So Liam, let me introduce you quickly. Before I do that, let me just introduce the podcast as the 100 Days and Beyond. The podcast is about post-merger integrations or the post-acquisition integrations, things that happen after the deal has been struck. The merger and acquisition, the biz dev team or the team that goes out and does the deal making, goes out and hunts down those targets and does all the negotiation, the due diligence, and they put the deal together, they sign the paperwork, and then once the deal is done, now the magic needs to happen, because now we need to make the actual work. Make the businesses work, make the synergy capture, create the value, and all those other things. But while the engine is running, and while you're probably going 100 miles an hour down the motorway. But Liam has got a very, very interesting story. And in fact, Liam comes from a probably relatively unorthodox for the older generation, if you like, background. But I think it's an industry that it must be taken seriously. It's an industry that has literally just hit the world by storm, probably over the last 5 years. So Liam McGreevy has joined us. He's from Elite Growth, Holistic Herb. Now that's very interesting, because if you can think about herbs, there's a special herb out there that people tended not to advertise too much. It was one now that's become more medicinal. So that's sort of, I would say, more in the background, but you're going to tell us more about that. But I'm going to just quickly read Liam's background, just a few pointers here. Summary is leading EU healthcare and Agritech executive. We're going to go into what Agritech means. So I need to understand that, I think, for the audience sake. Building businesses around brand development and technical services, a science and compliance background leading into 11 years in the Agritech industry, of exceptional knowledge across all areas of the production and distribution, assisting in building global supply chain, helping many producers globally to understand regulation and market access requirements for the most highly regulated markets in the world. And we're going to try and unpack what you really are talking about there. I'm a progressive business manager and a market developer with 15 years experience in sales and marketing, technical and compliance manufacturing and distribution operations, as well as finance and business development. I've developed a unique skill set across construction, compliance testing, horticultural equipment distribution, livestock nutrition, that's very interesting, medicine production and distribution, and regulatory engagement. And Liam, welcome to the show today. You bring a completely different flavor to our show, and I'm really looking forward to our episode today. I think you're going to bring something that's unique and special, and I want the audience to know about that. And I want you to just to share. Tell us how you got into it, if you want, and tell us how everything sort of panned out and where you are today and how did you get there?
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So I guess I've had a somewhat, as you said, unorthodox route into business, really. I started out as a science graduate and I worked in laboratory testing in the construction sector. Was in that for 6 years before being made redundant, and sort of needed to find a new industry, a new opportunity, and looked for sales roles on the advice of a friend. And so I got a job as a distributor, as a sales rep for a distributor of horticultural equipment. And that was in what we call a gray market. Most people that were in the end buying that equipment and at the retail end were using it to grow plants that weren't necessarily legal. So that was kind of my route into this market. That was back in 2008. And that sector grew quite rapidly following the recession, which I think is a reflection of the nature of that industry, really, and how cannabis, if you like, plays a role in day-to-day life in many countries, not just through gangs that are doing other things, but small individuals that are effectively feeding their families and paying their mortgages. So it's not what you'd expect to find, I think, when you look under the hood of that industry. That's sort of what I saw. And over time, I, through hydroponics, was involved in livestock nutrition for equine, the horses, I'm sorry, for cattle, etc. Because of my science and technical background, I think I'm able to understand new areas of technology and sort of move from one area to another. And then once I kind of got my head into the sales and marketing, I don't think I've always been decent with words and good at writing, so I can put a good pitch together. I can make it consistent and follow through from, the origin of the product through to what it means and to be able to highlight the USPs, etc. So I was relatively successful in that respect. And then moved on to a new employer who was setting up a business. And, you know, as the person that took over the company in the early stages, we grew it rapidly, but it was a lot of learning in terms of how to best manage a group of shareholders with, somewhat different interests or expectations and all of that. So a lot of learning in that period. And then, about 2015, 2016, the industry sort of started to emerge in a legal sense with, CBD retail products. We were one of the first companies in the UK to import. And I was, liaising with the Home Office here, and they hadn't a clue what to do. I was asking them if I could import the stuff, and I could never get a straight answer. The health authority tried to class CBD as a medicine, which didn't really make sense. And so I ended up having a meeting with them, understanding the medical side. And because of my background in science and the compliance side of things, working with big corporate companies, the government side never didn't really faze me, whereas in that sort of gray area, naturally a lot of people shied away from it. So I think that was a plus, and that I went after it and sort of lent into it. And so we have several businesses in that sector across retail, medical, ingredient development. And I've worked with a number of companies in, establishing the business, raising money, and, getting finance, doing acquisitions, etc. So, it's an interesting sector. It's growing, becoming more mainstream year on year, both medically and in the retail space as well, which I think is good, and it offers a lot of opportunity for new businesses. The opportunity will be as it grows into the mainstream, when bigger companies look to, for a fast route into the market, how do they do that? Do they build or buy? And most of the time it's acquisition that gets them, either medically, the IP for a clinical product, or retail, a brand that has a clear demographic and a well-established market and good distribution channel.
It's very interesting as a product because a lot of investors uh, if you take the Warren Buffett methodology, which is, only buy what you can understand. Okay. So, I
Yeah.
mean, from an investor point of view, that's the one side of the continuum, if you like.
Yeah.
Then you've got on the other side of the continuum, let's call it the tech investor. So it's SaaS and it's
Yeah.
fintech and it's all those high risk things that take years before they generate a revenue. They generate even a profit. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how long it took Uber to make money. I don't even know if they're making money yet, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's another story.
Yeah.
Twitter, I mean, you take all those guys. I mean, you just look at that value that companies and that's essentially, zeros and ones, some code.
Yeah.
With this particular market, it is, let's call it one of the oldest, I imagine, in terms of agri, not food production, but agri as in a production that's been happening for probably a very, very long time. You probably know better history than I do. You know the history of where it all comes from and all that.
Very much. It's really interesting. I think it's actually more near term than most people would realize. I think if you go back to the, for example, I live in the West Midlands in the UK. If you go to the Black Country Museum, just, which is about 45 minutes from here, in the pharmacy in the Black Country Museum, on the shelf is a bottle of cannabis oil from the early 1900s. It was a widely used product, I think, under Henry VIII. I think the law stated that any landowner of a certain size had to commit a minimum of 1 acre of hemp production, because hemp was used for fiber, for sails, for ropes, which is obviously the Armada was, that was what led to the expansion of the British Empire.
Mm.
And also paper, clothing, lots of other things. And hemp seed, produces actually a low carb version of flour. So for things like flatbreads, protein powders, that kind of thing, there are huge amounts of, like, lots of applications. The herd, which is the central part of the stock, can be used for construction materials to create biochar. And so I think in general, we're seeing a resurgence. So it was really the cotton industry, and that was a certain group of people that benefited dramatically from fast cotton that grew quite in the kind of southern Americas or middle Americas, and they obviously had cheap labor, with which to.
Cheap or no cost labor. They just had to ship them in, I think, those days.
Exactly right. So, which was, pretty dirty, I guess. But at the end of the day, it's a more workable material than hemp cotton. But, hemp has almost lost out on 100 years of technological development in genetic engineering and, manipulation of the material so to make it a comparable. So I think we're going to see a resurgence. And also, I think if you look at paper, paper mills, forestry, there are lots of people that own huge amounts of land that control the supply of paper, wheat and soy and all that stuff, as well as a dominant, like monoculture and food production, which isn't necessarily good for the planet either. you know, it's a real industrial drive for certain people to monopolize certain areas of, how we live our day-to-day lives. And hemp suffered as a result of that, unfortunately. We as a population have suffered as a result of not having these compounds in our system. We have what's called the endocannabinoid system within our body, which is a network of cell receptors that are triggered specifically by cannabinoids. Some of them we produce on our own, some of them we have evolved in sympathy, I think, with this plant, and it's designed to be part of our system in some respect. So, yeah, that's, I guess, a little bit of the history. And if you go back to the Narcotics Convention, I think it was 60s and 70s, that's not that long ago, when, the UN made it part of the control of narcotics. So really, it's only sort of 60 years where it's been properly prohibited as a substance in that respect. And that was a political maneuver, by the US, I believe. I think that's not, there are quotes from the relevant political, the people at the head of that government at the time that demonstrate that that's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. That's the background. But at the end of the day, it offers opportunity. And so when you talk about, understanding what you're investing in, if I look at crypto, for example, it's something that, I understand to a degree what it is at its base, which is in effect multiple databases all reconciling each other. I mean, you have to understand what the real application value is to understand if the business is viable, or the coin or the token is viable, is what's its real application and does it have utility ultimately. I think with this, everyone can understand that there is a market for it recreationally, like it or not. And there is, huge potential for the compounds that this plant produces for health and wellness. And also there are lots of industrial applications. So I think if you're looking at, the cannabis or hemp sector as something to invest in, it's a huge growth area that we're just at the start of, 100-year growth really in the kind of utility of this plant. Bear in mind as well, it's a carbon sink. So for every, I think, I can't remember if it's acre or hectare of hemp that you grow, you're kind of sinking 50 tons of carbon, and you can sell those on an exchange, have them certified and sell them. It's all around a net positive for the environment and for local commerce as well. So lots of positives.
Yeah. I mean, tongue in cheek, who would have thought Henry VIII would have been carbon neutral in his day?
Absolutely. But ultimately, you needed those solutions. It wasn't a global economy in the same way, back then as it is now. And to have those resources yourself, when we look at the current global economic situation, the West, if you like, Europe and America and USA are realizing the strength and stability you get from having production of your own resources and be product in your own country rather than relying on other economies. It's a double-edged sword. We've all been living off cheap product coming from China. We're starting to see the impact of that in our economies now.
I think for me, that I don't know, the cliche, history repeats itself, isn't it? I mean, it just goes full circle.
Yeah.
You might think you got short term gain, let's take the China example, but short-term gain often leads to long-term pain. I mean, we just have to look at Germany and Russia and getting the gas and oil. They were laying another pipe, and all of a sudden, it's no longer in vogue. It's like people are even questioning being locked down. And now you go back 100 years, and now you say, okay, well, the pharmacy, you could go into the pharmacy 100 years ago and buy it off the shelf, and then for some reason it became illegal, and then it's been a lot of media hype, and then it's been, it's obviously got some really bad press,
Like,
and then all of a sudden it's not such bad press anymore. Then now it's almost like the truth starts to reveal itself. It just seems to, everything always flows and ebb and flow. It seems to be circular. I don't know. What do you think?
yeah, no, like it's hard with something like, yeah, hemp. It's different. Like it's difficult to read that in the context of time, but yeah, it's sort of
Hmm.
like monopolies, I guess, only last so long is the reality, and I think as a citizenry, if you like, we should want sustainability, we want security. I think we've been too many of us have been too, I'm trying to think, sort of laid back, I guess, in regards to, what the source of our fuels are, where our food comes from, all of that stuff and what the underpinnings are. No one really thinks about subsidiaries. And when you talk about renewable fuels, a lot of people complain, I think, about the cost of renewables. They don't think about the fact that most fossil fuels are subsidized by about 60 to 70% by your government. You know,
Yeah, there's always more to the story than what they're telling you.
it's sort of hidden in plain sight, if you like. Just need, I think, to be a bit more conscious of, that's just, yes, it might cost a little bit more in the short term, but it becomes a self-fulfilling, so, you have to think about the economy as a whole. It might cost you more to pay for this product, but it's going into a local farm that's hiring local staff. They can pay more for the local staff. That's a big problem right now. All the cheap sort of Eastern European laborers, they're struggling to get that back now. So they have to, and I can tell you I think a 12-year-old child, I picked potatoes for a couple of summers. That's not fun.
No, that's
I don't want to
backbreaking
do it.
work.
I don't blame other people for not wanting to do that. But then if I had to, I would, right? If I had to do that job to feed my family, I would do that. But, it's a hard job to do and there's not a lot of hunger for that, understandably. But if you're getting paid a better living wage for doing so, you'd be more inclined to do it. And so I think that's in the bigger picture, we need to think about that as a society, I guess.
So just before we go into the integration side of things and the acquisitions and things taking place, it's just interesting you mentioned crypto, because that's another one, but mystical in its value. Yeah, that's something that I don't fully understand. I understand blockchain, and I understand that they can probably use it, for better purposes than creating some weird currencies that fluctuate incredibly. Again, it's like one of those weird things where if you look at the agri, and I want to talk about agri-tech as you explain it. I just quickly want to say you started at Bureau Veritas. I
Yeah.
mean, that's where they
So,
do the ISOs and all that kind of thing. I mean, that must have been a great start for your later on career, isn't it?
so it's interesting. I started my first role was with RMC or and CEMEX acquired the business. So that was an in-house laboratory, um, doing all the testing and product development for CEMEX in the UK. And I was there for 4 years and then moved to Bureau Veritas, which was more commercial. So that was a big shift, to come from an in-house lab where it was fairly comfortable, you know, like, yeah, there was pressure, but it wasn't the same as when you move into that commercial world. And look, I'd worked in retail stores and stuff as a younger, worked on the tills in the supermarket and all that stuff and worked in shops. And so I've done retail, consumer facing, but it's different when you have, for example, Bureau Veritas. When you think about a massive industrial park, so, before they start to build anything, they have to level it all. They have to do all the like layers of subbase and clay and permeability and all that testing needs to be done. And you might be on a 7-day turnaround for a lot of those tests. Otherwise you don't get paid. Or the business doesn't get paid. So, that's a different kind of pressure. So that was interesting to move into that commercial sphere with the certification and that, businesses are relying on you to get the results out in order to keep their projects moving forward. But also, you're there as a fail safe for And they're a client ultimately that if the material they're using isn't correct, that, it needs to be picked up in the testing phase. Because if you end up, with Cemex, I think they was part of the M6 toll road, it was a huge road around Birmingham here. If you pick something up early on, then, you don't go building the rest of the road when you've got a faulty material. Um, at the same time, the testing is there to protect the company that if something happens subsequently, you can show that you test the material and there must be something else at fault. So, it's interesting to work in that angle. And even from the perspective of road construction, like there's a lot involved in it. We all drive on the road every single, a lot of us every day. You just don't really give a thought to the processes involved and the amount of work that that's doing for the infrastructure and the economy of the company. Or the country, sorry, is huge, right? So there's a lot of work involved and a lot of, it's big commercial activity. And yeah, the certification side is interesting. But you mentioned the crypto, and this is something that sort of came to me through the pandemic. Was doing some trade and medical equipment, as a lot of people, I guess, were trying to do. We got some contracts in that front. And, it's really the transparency around certification for different companies and products and as they move around the world. And I think that's really where, for me, the utility of crypto or blockchain is in the transparency of transactions, product exchange in hands, the origin, verification, all that stuff, because it's an indelible record and it's, uncorruptible. So from that perspective, it has a lot of utility in, I think, certification and product origination. Whether it's useful in itself as a coin, I don't, it, if you wanted to know all the different hands and all the different transactions that a coin was used in, fine, but like, I don't really see that has unless it's underpinned by something. So the US dollar is underpinned by oil transactions. People agree we're going to use the US dollar to buy and sell the oil, and therefore it underpins the value of the currency.
Well, there's something of tangible value that it represents, isn't it? It's not just
Yeah,
code,
they have
0 and
consumer
1.
activity in the country. It's a country of what, 325 million people, all spend dollars all day, every day. It's a big consumer market. So you got
Mm.
lots of transactions in the currency and, goods exchange in hands that sort of underpin a value. And then you have massive commodity transactions happening in the same currency. So you have at the two ends, you have a lot of consumer activity, a lot of commodity activity that's helping to underpin the value of the currency, really, where people agree that $1 is worth this much because there's a lot of transactions happening. If the transactions slow down, then you go, well, is it really worth what it's?
The reason why I went this route was, um, I think to establish the credibility in terms of the depth and the breadth and the deep understanding of markets, of the agri environment, even the history of certain things. I mean, you got a really, really thorough understanding of your market. You got a good handle on in terms of the entire sort of space that you move in. So this doesn't come lightly. This is not something you decided to sell a Coke and a Coke and a packet of crisps and this is it. You actually come from. I mean, Bureau Veritas. That's. I mean, those guys are serious when it comes to their accreditations and so on, all the way through. And when I look at your career, I mean, hydro, et cetera, et cetera. And then it comes to Agritech. So let's go there, and then we can start talking about sort of integrations and how a lot of that stuff now starts to filter into integrations or the acquisitions and integrations. Um, Number one, Agritech. Number two, sort of those integrations and that. And then number three, if I remember, we're going to touch on how do you value
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
a cannabis type of business. But I mean, let's leave that for the end. Let's talk agri first.
so I guess from an like agricultural technology is anything really as a broad scope that can, cover the cultivation of vegetables, tomatoes, cucumbers, into, livestock farming, anything that's, based around farming in effect is, and is on the technological side. So that includes equipment, that includes, feed technology, fertilizers, all that stuff. So, over the years, like I say, I've worked around farming side with feed into livestock, and it's again one of these very undervalued um areas of the market. And I think something that as a society people don't really value farmers enough in terms of what they do to feed us, and how complicated that is. Um, but yeah, doing understanding um livestock feed and the value of it and nutrition, how it all works is, it's a complex thing in itself. Um, and then moving into sort of commercial horticulture, not necessarily just for cannabis, but specifically the last 4 or 5 years, doing a lot of work around where people are getting licenses to build greenhouses and then trying to help consult for them so that they have an effective setup that can produce something that is a consistent medicinal product, which is extremely hard to do because of the nature of the plant. So, yeah, a lot of years of experience across various elements of agricultural technology, really.
Yeah, and one and an ed and let's call it an added element of risk these days is obviously environmental impact, the weather changes, etc. But we're also looking at things like pollution and other types of waste. There's about being regenerative as opposed to just discarding things. Try and use everything as opposed to throwing things away. There's just a complete a mindset shift, and it's almost a social shift, if you like, the way we think about these things. Even those horticultural, those greenhouses where you got aquaculture working with
Mm.
horticultural setups, where you got hydroponics, and I mean it's absolutely amazing. And I saw something on TV the other night, and it was just a flash, and it just come back to me is how they actually use methane to increase the speed at which plants grow. Uh,
Yeah,
I mean, that was like, wow, I thought methane's the bad guy. It's like, "Ah, okay, well, now I get it. And in fact, it's not so bad." So it's
yeah.
it's again context.
It's about balance. Like with
Exactly.
like, I'm a big fan of thinking about things in a balanced way. So, because of my degree in biological oceanography, um, you look at all sides of the situation, and the sort of ecosystem mindset. It
Mm,
becomes really obvious that, you can't just pull one string and affect everything, and expect that to balance things. It's, the way we're looking at sustainability at the moment. You need a sort of a network effect. You need to really understand more about how the planet properly operates. For me, if we're going to, like with climate change and all of that, having studied some of that, albeit 20 years ago, um, really data quality is important. How much we're measuring, what we're measuring, and how often, and all that stuff is very important. But yeah, I think from a sustainability perspective, from I think as I mentioned before, with our economy here in the UK or in any country or any part of the world, people are thinking about it a bit more. We've lived on cheap fuel for years. I don't understand how in any world it was right that we were basically sending carrots to China to be peeled and cut and packaged and sent back here in the ship. I mean, that's mad, right? The fact that like we actually, that happens. It's insane, but that's the fact of cheap fuel to ship it around the place and cheap labor in China is averse to, like, how can that be cheaper than paying someone to do it in the UK? I don't understand that. It's, that's the problem. So people are desperate.
Unintended consequences too, though, because that's always the thing. At face value, I think I like your approach of having a balanced view. I mean, you don't always realize from at face value, if the accountants look at it, it's, you
Yeah.
know, income less expenses equals profit. What's wrong with that calculation?
But this is where companies are being made to think about their carbon footprint. And I think I'm not sure that it's, the right way to think about it necessarily, or that the mechanisms where, people are trading, you can, buy carbon credits from somebody who's farming hemp to offset your, like, it doesn't necessarily discourage you, particularly from doing what you're doing, but at least you're funding, a carbon sink activity. So I get it sort of makes sense, but whether it's sustainable long term in that model, I don't know. But yeah, from that perspective, we need to, think reasonably about um, what makes more sense longer term. And as you say, what's the pollution associated with the ships and ships backward and forward carrying all these vegetables and all the rest of it. So people have been employed. That money is going into the economy. They're feeding their families, paying mortgages. That's a plus. At the same time, there's pollution and other consequences around all that stuff moving around that doesn't necessarily need to. So
Yeah, and often the politicians get it wrong. I mean, again, we can probably have a different conversation around politicians, but sometimes there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. So what happens is they come to some sort of mediated agreement that appeases both sides, and both sides are sort of okay with the result. Sort of, okay, we'll do carbon credits to make the green people happy,
yeah,
and for the people making money, they're also sort of happy, and yeah, everyone can just get along. But in fact, sort of, it's probably going to become worse over time if we
yeah,
go if we sort of shift now into the acquisition of I mean, it's down to as simple as land that's can do that kind of is it agronomy? Do you call it that? Is that the
yeah.
correct
It
term?
probably would be
Agronomy in terms of the planting or arable land,
mhm,
the right kind of land, obviously the right kind of climate, et cetera, et cetera. Acquiring the land or acquiring an entity that's already producing,
yeah,
or setting something up, or even processing plants and so on, and then all these then the ancillary industries there that support those in terms of machines and equipment and so on, and then there's distribution and packaging and you name it. So there's different aspects to this industry, just like any industry. Just sort of touch on a number of those, and but with a slant on M&A and integrations.
yeah. So I guess if you're um if you're someone that's looking at like getting into this sector and you think where do we get into this, given my experience over the years and what we do as our businesses now is like we've really tried to focus on the areas that we think have the most uh, growth in value or that offer the most value with growth. And like we talked about farming being a hard game and all the rest of it, and underappreciated, and it is. And it's always at the bottom of the chain. So where we focus our energies are on building brands in markets. If you have that retail revenue, albeit through distributors as well, so wholesale, then, and you have the brand control, you can build IP around that, then you have something that's, you have a higher price point,
Mhm.
and sort of more in market control. And I think on ingredient technology as well, where improvement in absorption of active ingredients is something that's, offers a lot of value. So that's kind of where we tend to focus our energy now, just over the years of trying to understand where the real value is. If you wanted to get into, if you're in horticulture or you're in farm, you want to get into this space, depending on how you want to approach it, and from a market perspective, the retail market is um, lower barrier to entry in terms of licensing for cultivation of industrial hemp, but ultimately is, the price point is lower per product or per milligram of active ingredient, if you want to look at it that way. Um, and if you're looking to acquire a facility that is cultivating, then, there's a lot to think about in terms of the licensing, the team that's doing it, like how effective are they producing? Are they maximizing the facility? Um, is it hanging on sort of one or two people that are really key in terms of understanding how to grow the plant really well, understanding the quality management systems. There's a lot to think about when if you're looking to acquire a business of that nature, in terms of the team that are, the business that's there already, who's involved, who are the key people, do they want to stay in the business, and all of that stuff. Cultivating for medical obviously has a higher barrier to entry because you need narcotics licenses, and has much more robust quality management systems. So to kind of start that from scratch is a long road. I've been talking to people since 2016 that have been on that path. I've got a relationship with a guy in Portugal who's just about to come to market now after sort of 3 or 4 years of um, starting off, building a facility in Portugal. So it's a long road, but it potentially has value. It's just going to be limited in the future. So a lot of these people that started off with cultivation facilities are now looking to buy into brands that are in the market, so they've got that retail revenue under a great business, if you like, because ultimately that's where we think the real value is in the market showing that. I think the fact that the people that started out thinking we're going to grow loads of weed are now thinking, what really matters is a good brand and sort of like having consumers coming back for your product every month and to buy again and again.
Because it's a repeat purchase, isn't it? It's an ongoing purchase. But if it's medicinal, for whatever reasons they have it, they would have it on a regular basis. So coming, just coming back to what you've just been saying. So in essence, it's following standard economic or business models. You got your producers, you've got your
Yeah,
manufacturers or whatever it is, you got your distribution channel. But at the end of the day, it's who adds the most value probably gets paid the most, in terms of the market perception,
yeah,
and who's best at marketing.
yeah. Ultimately, that's right. And so for me, having been in distribution since 2008, we have a huge amount of experience in validating the supply chain, structuring a portfolio of products as a distributor. You can have 2 or 3 products that are in this that do exactly the same job, but you have your good, better, best and you can have that across every different sector. Um, but it has to be the right message, the right brand, the right price, the right margin, all of that stuff. And the work that you put into launching those brands is can be costly, and is important to have the right margin structure behind it, and then have the right relationship with the supplier that's going to support you and see it as a kind of a joint operation, whether it's their brand or your brand or a co-branded effort. There's lots of different ways to do that. But yeah, so I think it does follow traditional metrics, whether it's medicine, whether it's food, whether it's cosmetics. You have a farmer that produces a plant, then you have an extraction facility that extracts the active ingredients, whether that's in the farm or not. Most people that are doing cannabis farming are doing extraction. In the US, there are people that are doing huge amounts of tolling. So they take the flower, they extract the oils, they either sell it on or give it back to the farm to sell the oil. Um, so yeah, and then you take the oil, you can either use that as a bulk, or you can refine it again into an individual compound, isolates, etc. So yeah, there's nothing particularly new in that respect. I think that's the thing where people come in and go, this is going to be different. It's not different. Active ingredients, or some of them are effective for certain things, or they work better together potentially. This thing called the entourage effect. So it's understanding at the end where the value, as I said, is in that distribution, creating a brand that is effective and it means something to people. Um, but understanding the product is key to that as well. And there's a lot to run. Look, the cannabis plant produces somewhere in the region of potentially about 150 different cannabinoids. So THC is the one that gets you high. CBD is the one that's sort of popular now as a non-psychoactive, anti-inflammatory and all of that stuff. But then you have CBG, CBC. Those are both similar to CBD in their effect. They're non-psychoactive. You have CBN, which is a psychoactive, controlled in the UK, but not in the rest of Europe. Potentially has very strong effects for pain relief, for sleep, for anesthesia. And that's just 5, and there are 100, over 100 more that will have either similar or slightly different effects in some form of utility. So, there's a lot of opportunity to specialize in producing certain cannabinoids. and to bring them to market for, with a certain brand or a certain effect or whatever that might be. So yeah, I think it's to say it's not necessarily that it's, I think where it is different, I guess, is that this is something that bleeds, across medicinal to wellness and sort of, therapeutics into having a good time, ultimately, which, there aren't many things that kind of like really like bleed across all of that. So yeah.
Some people think wine could be like that too.
Yeah, well, look, I do. There 100% people use alcohol as stress relief, boredom relief, whatever, and sort of uh, yeah, sleep. Like people do use alcohol as a, I guess, a remedy or a therapeutic to a degree, and if they want to hide from their problems, and even that in itself, is psychological, anxiety reducing.
So it's not the substance itself. It's people that could either use it properly or abuse it. So coming then to valuations and based on everything that you've said now, let's say I'm looking at a business. I mean, theoretically, it's better to be higher up the supply chain than at the sort of growth level if possible, but depends on how you put the business together. But the same fundamentals apply. Are you going to look at it in terms of who's the management, sales, marketing, operations, distribution? You're going to look at the same sort of things. You're going to look at a brand and brand value, assets, liabilities, etc. It's the same valuation principles. How big is the market? What is the uptake? Is it a growth industry? Isn't it? For me, it's probably a growth industry. And so I think from an investor point of view, you look at this as yeah, this is probably I don't understand blockchain, or I don't understand cryptocurrency. I don't really tech, high tech, fintech, this tech, that tech is a bit too far for me. I don't necessarily want to go into too like engineering or anything like that. And if I'm looking at it at something that's maybe different, it's still got the same business principles. So if you do have a bit of business background or you are a practitioner in business, same principles apply. So okay, we've put that one to bed. So now in terms of let's go through a bit of history around sort of acquisitions and things that you've done, and give us whatever give us a case study or two. I mean, it doesn't have to be acquisitions, but it could be anything. Give us a case study or two. I mean, as we shift now towards the integration side of things, and especially now because of your market knowledge, your broad experience across distribution, marketing, branding, and even all the way back to the actual the growing of it and so on. Give me a bit of a sort of one or two ideas, case studies, stories that you've got for us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't, I didn't think of this initially, but when I worked for RMC, they were bought out by Cemex. And so like I was very low down the chain, obviously, as a technician in a lab, but we had to merge together with, there was a, like we worked on one side of the business. There was a similar lab that worked on the sort of the concrete side of the business. And obviously rationalizing everything, they were like, we're going to put these two labs together. And so that was an interesting, experience, we had to move location, all that stuff. So just as an employee, in a fairly big company, you're going through that process where you're being meshed together, you got new structure, a new facility, and all the rest of it it was interesting to go through, I guess. In more recent times as an entrepreneur, I've been involved in, as I said before, I've had, investors, um, part of our business, helping us to grow the business, invest in money, and looking at doing mergers and acquisitions. And um, we've sort of always, I think valuations, as we talked about, you can look at it and as in this is a normal valuation metrics. In this kind of sector, people have inflated valuations because it's seen as this huge growth into the future in the same way that tech companies were. I think that's sort of deflating a little bit now. But as an entrepreneur, like for ourselves, where you create a certain amount of value with a really successful brand, for example, leading early stage, you want a little bit of a premium if you're gonna sell the business to somebody else or merge in with somebody else, there are two things. One, you want to get something out of it, at least, if it's been a couple of years and you want to make, some cash in your pocket, if you like, to kind of make it all worthwhile, at least a little bit initially, and then
Mm.
with some outcome in the future. Um, and yeah, so I think like that's really important to think about when if you're looking to sell a business, is on the other side of it is, who are the people that you're selling to or you're looking to merge with or integrate with, is it a good fit? The management team, are the goals the same? Have they got the funding really that you want? That, if it's like one of these small early stage businesses, there's a lot of, people that say they have money, that don't have money, or, there's
Living off their credit cards.
well, or is the money really there? When it comes down, when it comes to the
Mm.
crunch, and they may just want your revenue, for example, if you've got a certain amount of, you've got a good revenue profile, and not a lot of debt. There you go, great, we'll buy this revenue, then we can go and raise more money down the track. That happens a lot too, and so you just have to be really careful when if you're on the sell side, that you're going to get what you need as a shareholder, as an individual personally, and that the business you're merging into has a similar goal as yourself, and has the right funding structure, and you can work with that team going forward. I think when you're on the acquisition side, you're looking more at, again, are the goals shared? Are these people, the business as it sits that you're buying, is it something that can grow? Because ultimately you want to acquire it to be able to grow it, ideally. So if you're doing that, does the business have the scope to grow in the market, as you mentioned, market capture, market value? It is a growth sector, so there's growth to be had. Is this the right brand, team, business to be able to capture that growth? If you give it sufficient funding. So I think on both sides,
Mm.
there has to be alignment of goals, of mindsets, and ability to work together. And like, you never know until it's done, and it's done, whether or not you really fit with people, and you get into the hard conversations sometimes
Mm.
about, where your budget's going. I want to do this project. I think that's right. Those are the hard things, but I think if you do them and have those conversations in the right way, and you keep the end goal in mind, and everyone's on board with getting to that end goal, then you can usually work through those things. And that's how most, successful founder teams develop, is that you have a bit of yin and yang, a bit of balance in the team, but everybody's able to kind of put their ego to bed at times, and, buy into the group, wherever we think is right as a group, then usually you'll be successful. And that's the same post merger, really, or post acquisition, is as long as you keep that ethos, and then, generally you'll be successful. But going back to it, like I mentioned before, in with cultivation businesses particularly, it's very sensitive. And growing cannabis it's a weed, and so it tends to grow quite well on its own in the wild. But when you put it in a greenhouse and you try to grow it in controlled conditions, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. So humidity causes problems, pests cause problems, light periods affect the amount of ingredient that you get from the plant. So, ideally you want someone who knows what they're doing, and that's really hard. Some of those people are a bit rough around the edges, is probably the best way to put it, because of the nature of what they've been doing for a long time. They have experience. And and they start to have this clash between sort of, gray market people and corporate people. And so that's something to think about with, but that probably happens in a lot of early stage businesses where founders are, very passionate and aggressive and all the rest of it. And then you have, maybe a fund or investment company that's, not quite so, bullish about
Well,
it.
I mean, you could even look at established businesses. I mean, you could look at electricians, plumbers, lifts and escalator installers. I mean, you could look at any of the smaller sort of, I don't really, I don't want to offend anybody, but you have sort of the really small cowboy style man in a van type of
Yeah.
environment, very trade orientated. And then you've got on the other end, people that run it like a proper business, people that run it like with proper systems, processes, all the checks and balances, employ the right kind of knowledge and experience into the business. So when you're looking at integrations or even acquisitions in the space, you really want someone, at least one or two people that know what they're doing. At least a few technical people that stay behind. I mean, if you know nothing about cannabis or anything like that, you do need a few experts. You need people that understand the regulations and things around it. I want to come quickly back to your because in the last few minutes, I just want to sort of just switch gears a bit and just talk a bit about your companies.
Mhm.
Um, Holistic Herb,
Yeah.
CBD, your director, 2018
Mhm.
to now, and then Elite Growth director, a
Mhm.
year and 2 months, a little bit shorter, but co-founder, director, CEO. Something I want to read, and maybe we can just expand on that. So just tell us a bit about the companies. But
Yeah.
in a paragraph, you mention, as CEO, I'm responsible for working with the board of directors and the management team to set the vision and strategic direction of the company, ensure we have the resources to deliver our goals, and within an early stage business, actively drive the execution. And this is key for me: commercial partnerships, agreements, financing, and the M&A activity. So one thing a lot of people don't realize that is, if you getting into a commercial agreement, a partnership of some sort, you have a joint venture or some kind of agreement that you not necessarily swapping shares for money or whatever it is, but you've agreed to work together. I mean, it could be up and down a supply chain, it could be
Yeah.
competitors working together, sharing things, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I think that's part of integration. I mean, just do you want to maybe just expand on that first a bit about the two companies, and then just expand a bit about how, what's important around those?
Yeah. So Holistic Herb is, um, yeah, that's been, like you said, founded in 2018. Really, it's a relatively small team, myself and two other people, Jason and Andy. And, we've managed to kind of build and maintain the business. We've got one main client really, which is Holland and Barrett, who are, the largest health food retailer in Europe. And that's sort of like the basis of the business really. And we're looking to expand that now. We've had some novel food regulatory, I guess, issues that have slowed everyone down here in the UK. And that's hopefully resolving now. So we're seeing some growth, which is great. And it's just about how, amongst the three of us, we make the decisions on a week to week basis in terms of how we want to grow the business. So that's pretty straightforward. It's not, it's not complicated. There's not a lot of people involved. It's a small team and the three of us are the board. So that's pretty straightforward. On Lake Growth side, it's a bit more complex in terms of the number of people involved. And it's, a lot more on the medical ingredient side. So, the partnerships are crucial in terms of working with companies that have technology that we can bring through to run clinical trials. Um, and in terms of ingredient technology that improves, bioavailability, to bring that to market. These are kind of longer term projects that take a lot of time and effort. And obviously we need investment for as well. So, but that ultimately provide huge amounts of value long term. And so you need people with the right licenses, you need people with the right experience and in order to be able to execute on your goals. So, you can have a good product and, do you have the license to bring it in? Do you have a physician that's willing to prescribe it and a clinic that's willing to run the trial with you and all of that stuff? So yeah, there are a lot of bits and pieces there that sort of bring this thing together. But yeah, that's just part of, as I said before, was like in the distribution business. I think wholesale distribution is massively underrated, and most people don't, really think about it that
Mm,
much as far as the supply chain is concerned. It's, it's a really, um, it's a really difficult thing to do in some respects. To sort of manage a portfolio of products, you're
mm.
responsible for the supply chain, you're responsible for brand management, marketing activity. You're really like you're affected right the way through, and you're responsible for all of that. But it is a very fulfilling role, and you can make a lot of money doing that if you do it right. So which is, like in one of our businesses, we're talking to a lot of these companies that, you take Spar, which is a retail brand that most people will know, convenience stores and
Mm.
petrol forecourts, and they have distribution businesses that manage them on a regional basis, and they have some of the stores they own themselves. Plus, then they have hundreds of other stores that they're distributing to. So that's kind of their supply. They're doing huge revenues, and it's like businesses that nobody knows. People know Spar, but you don't know the distribution business behind it. It's actually doing a lot of the
It's
same.
massive, and it works. I mean, if I think of that and co-op, and you see the vans and the delivery, and there's always fresh food around, and there's always, and the shelves are just in time in terms of packed. I mean, they only have that amount of shelf space. I mean, it's massive. I mean, the whole distribution business. So I want to now just go to a little bit more personal. Liam, we've come into the end of the podcast, and I could spend I could spend hours with every one of my guests, and then you one of them. Um, uh, Tell us a bit about how do you? I mean, there's two businesses, complex environment, an industry that requires probably a lot of talking, a lot of negotiation, a lot of relationships that need to be built, maintained, and sort of expanded continuously. Tell us, how do you keep your head, in straight? How do you keep sane in this crazy world that we live in? What do you do out of work, etc.? I mean, how do you balance it? Is there such a thing?
Uh, it's really tough, I have to say. And it's something that I think since the pandemic hit, and I guess for reference, like I've always been a hard worker. I've always been a competitive person, played a lot of sports growing up, and played Gaelic games and football, to a half decent level. So I've kind of got that competitive streak in me. Um, and I when I moved from laboratory work, working for big companies, went through that Cemex sort of merger, and then Bureau Veritas being made redundant, you realize that working for big companies seems pretty stable, but it's not necessarily always that stable. And my wife worked for local government; she got made redundant. Those are supposed to be jobs for life. So I think when I got into the distribution business and sales and marketing, and performed very well, I started to understand the opportunity, and I saw the guys that owned that business do pretty well out of the growth. They went from 5 million a year to 20 million a year in 4 years, and then, there was four of them that were shareholders and directors, and I just thought, you know, can I do that basically? And after 4 years there and getting this opportunity with the new business, I thought, maybe I can, or it certainly was an opportunity to learn and grow into it. And so over the years, like I've always had that hard work ethic. And then as you start to realize your abilities to do this stuff yourself, then, you're really going after it, and you're kind of committed to making it work. So there's an element of, you don't want to fail, I guess, so you'll put everything into it. But also with the hard work ethic. I mean, I like to understand the technical stuff behind what I'm doing. So I do tend to do a lot of reading on my phone. My wife hates my phone. Not so much now, but she certainly used to. Like sitting around at the weekend or on a Friday night, whatever, every night of the week at watching TV, I'd be reading stuff on my phone. And it's not necessarily for pleasure. It's just interesting information about the market, about new technology, whatever it might be. It helps you kind of understand things on a slightly deeper level. And even just general, business articles, or about, the right ideas around running a business, managing people, inspiring people, all of that sort of stuff. So I consumed a lot of information over the years, and I think when I was, doing crazy hours for years and years trying to, build these businesses, and um, when the pandemic hit, it actually got even crazier, which is because of these sort of PPE transactions,
Mm.
which we got we did a little bit of business on that. It wasn't huge, but was enough to keep our heads above water for a little while there. And I was doing even crazier hours because we were dealing with people in China and people in Europe and the US, and it was like everyone was panicking. And when that slowed down, I just sort of took a bit of a breath and thought, I need to really I was like 40, 41, thinking, you know, you can sort of give everything of this of yourself to this stuff, and it doesn't necessarily always work out. It doesn't mean that you have to give up, but you know, I'm no good to anybody if I'm not healthy and I'm not here. So I think that's sort of my approach now to is to try and be really productive in um in within a certain time frame, but to give myself, personally the time to stay fit and healthy. Got a Peloton beside me here, so I use a Peloton. I've got a membership in the local gym, and certainly over the last, 6 months or so, I tried to make a more concerted effort to build that into my life. And so I think with anything, success comes from repeated positive habits, and it's about building those habits. Save your business, managing your business or success in your business. Sales, that to me was with when I first got into sales and that distribution business was about just repeat, you know what I mean? Do the right things on a repeated basis, follow up with your customers, let them know that you care about them, that you're resolving the problems. You can, if they ask for a price and you get it back, just the little things that and just repeating those habits. And that's the same with all areas of your business. And then your personal life too, ultimately, is trying to, make those little habits consistent. So it is, hectic at times,
Mm.
and sometimes it gets really pressured, but you don't, there's nothing of value comes for free, ultimately at the end of the day. And if you want, financial freedom and you want to be able to choose what projects you get involved in and when, you need to kind of earn that freedom, I guess. So.
Yeah, you got to earn your stripes, and I mean, if I could summarize some of the key traits, successful people like yourself, you have a purpose, you know what you want, you're drawn to that purpose. That purpose drives you. It's this, the company that I established is called Skillful Pursuit, and that is the pursuit of those skills, the constant learning, curiosity. um and the pursuit is this never ending journey, isn't it? There's always just one more thing to do. There's always just one more client to go and see.
Yeah, as a sports fan, like, I'm a Manchester United fan. I know there'll be a lot of groans, but like when, the period when I was growing up in the 80s, they didn't really win very much. And then when you get into kind of early 90s, all of a sudden they start winning. But that's about, the characters of the people that were in the team over that period of time. And, Roy Keane's a famous one, I guess, but it was very much a kind of, on to the next one mentality is, what's next. And I think, for me, there are always other opportunities. And are even with, say, Holistic Herb, uh, we can expand, when the regulation allows. You've got Europe, North America, South Asia is starting to come on stream for cannabis, which is really exciting, huge population. South America, there's lots of growth potential there, if it's sort of done and funded in the right way and all of that stuff. So it's a case of how much do you want that? You know what I mean? So it depends on whether you're happy to kind of take a check now, or do you want to be a Johnson Johnson, Procter and Gamble brand Gillette? Do you want to be a Gillette, or do you want to be some whatever, the one that didn't make it? So
There's no right or wrong. It's whatever drives you and whatever gives you that fulfillment that you need. um we've come to the end of the podcast. I mean, I could probably spend another few hours with you, Liam. Stay on the line. I just want to say goodbye to our audience, and then from there we can have a quick brief chat after that. So I just want to say goodbye to the audience. Thank you very much, to everyone that's dialed in today, and to all the followers of our 100 Days and Beyond podcast. Today was something different. Today for me was something special, and today for me was an industry that a lot of people don't know and understand. But what's evident is that it's the same as most. The principles and that are the same as all the other industries. Some industries get good or bad press. Regardless, it is still it's still a business. It's still something that's viable in terms of having a look at. And if you're passionate about something, you're going to drive, you're going to be in it. And just like Liam said, you know, you can decide where you want to go and if you want to be big or small. I think for me, today's episode was it's dedicated to something slightly different to integrations per se, but it's dedicated more to an industry that's not as well understood. But there are different types of integration. So I think the takeaway for me today, especially for the M&A, the post-merger integration or post-acquisition integration people, is that integrations don't necessarily have to happen after a sale or an acquisition. Integrations can actually happen when you're working together with others or other companies or other entities um, that have the skills, the finance, the technology, the people, and so on, that you can bring people together to have a joint purpose, but you don't necessarily have to buy the company. However, there still is an integration. There's still people, there's still processes, there's still systems, and there's still intellectual property, and that needs to be integrated, put together, so you can again get the value creation and the synergy capture. Thank you very much for joining us on today's episode. Join us on our next episode of 100 Days and Beyond. Thank you very much for supporting our channel. And please click on the button to subscribe and look forward to the next episode. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Hi everybody, this is Dudley again, and if you need help with a future or existing post-merger integration, I want to invite you to arrange a free, no obligation meeting with us. During the meeting, we'll find out exactly what you need, what your challenges are, and we'll explain how our unique PMI slipstream method can help you. Simply call us or visit mergerintegration.co.uk. That's mergerintegration.co.uk, or come to our website, skillfulpursuit.com.